What kind of intake manifold puts the carburetors 3 feet apart, hanging out over the fenders? What do you get when a group of young Chrysler engineers grab a piece of scrap off the dyno room floor, bolt it onto a $50 Plymouth, and accidentally invent an entirely new type of intake? Well, you get one of the wildest induction systems ever fitted to a production car. 2 4-barrel carbs sitting out past the valve covers, connected by aluminum runners crossing over the entire engine. I have to say, this is hands down one of the coolest looking things to ever sit under a hood. This is Chrysler's cross-ram induction. Now, before we even get to the production car, we have to talk about where this thing actually came from, because the origin story is ridiculous. See, in the late 50s, there was a car club in Detroit made up of young Chrysler engineers. Guys who spent the week designing engines and spent the weekend drag racing them. They called themselves the Ramchargers. And in '58, about 25 of these guys kicked in $30 each, went out and bought a beat-up 1949 Plymouth business coupe for $50 and decided they were going to build a drag car. So, what did they stick on top of the engine? This is the good part. They grabbed a leftover test piece from Chrysler's Ram tuning research program. Basically a piece of lab equipment that got tossed in a corner after dyno testing was done. Nobody wanted it. Tom Hoover, Jim Thornton, and the rest of the crew hauled it out, dialed in the runner lengths, and bolted it onto a 354 cubic inch Hemi that they had pulled from, I kid you not, a warranty scrap pile. And just like that, they had built what is generally considered the very first tunnel ram intake manifold ever used on a drag car. The term tunnel ram didn't even exist yet. These guys literally invented the category. They showed up at the '59 NHRA Nationals at Detroit Dragway, painted in the ugliest blue-green primer you've ever seen, running under the name Ramrod. And there's one detail about this car that I absolutely love. Somebody hand-scratched shift, damn it, with a little skull and crossbones on the tachometer at 5,500 RPM. If that doesn't tell you everything about these guys, nothing will. By the next season, the car was repainted white, picked up a dealer sponsor, and got renamed the High and Mighty. The original was scrapped years ago, as far as anyone can tell, but a tribute replica still exists with that original tunnel ram and hand-marked tack. Now, here's where Chrysler took what these weekend racers figured out and turned it into something you could actually buy at a dealership. For 1960 and 61, they released the long ram induction package across the full-size C-body lineup. Plymouth called it the Sonoramic Commando. Dodge called it D500 Ram Induction, and it was available on the 361, 383, and 413. The runners were about 30 inches long, which tuned the intake pulse to hit right around 2,800 RPM. And if you're wondering what that feels like in a 5,000-pound Chrysler 300, imagine you're cruising at 40 miles an hour, you floor it, and the thing shoves you back in the seat like somebody kicked your chair. Absolutely ridiculous low-end torque. But here's the catch. By about 4,500 RPM, it was all used up. Done. So this was a highway passing machine, not a drag car. If you ask me, that's actually a pretty brilliant match for the interstate system that was just opening up across the country at the time. Oh, and if you needed to change the spark plugs on one of these, good luck. You had to pull the front wheels off and reach up through the inner fender with a long extension and a wobble socket. Heck, some of these cars had factory cutouts in the wheel well with rubber flaps just to get at the plugs. Not exactly owner-friendly. So, what do you do when your intake makes incredible torque but runs out of breath at 4,500 RPM and you want to go drag racing? Well, you shorten the runners, and that's exactly what Tom Hoover's team did. On May 1st, 1962, the Max Wedge showed up, officially the Maximum Performance Wedge. Dodge called theirs the Ramcharger 413, Plymouth called it the Super Stock 413, and it landed exclusively in the lighter, newer B-body intermediates. This thing existed for one reason and one reason only: winning NHRA Super Stock. The short cross-ram intake with 2 Carter AFB 4 barrels pushed the power peak way up past 5,000 RPM, right where a quarter-mile car needed it. Now, how much power are we talking about? The 11-to-1 compression version was rated at 410 horsepower. The 13.5-to-1, which, mind you, basically demanded race fuel, was rated at 420. And I love what the owner's manual said about these engines. It straight up warned you. Rough idle, lazy throttle response at low speed, forget about gas mileage, and, this is my favorite part, do not hold wide open throttle for more than 15 seconds or you will damage the engine. 15 seconds. If you have to put that warning in the manual, you have absolutely not built a car for picking up groceries. And the results backed it up. In July of '62, a guy named Tom Grove climbed into a 413 Max Wedge Plymouth Savoy called the Melrose Missile and ripped off an 1193 second quarter mile at 118.57 miles per hour. That was the first production engine car to ever break into the 11-second zone, period. The Chevy 409 guys and the Ford 406 crowd were suddenly scrambling. For '63, Chrysler bored it out to 4¼ inches, and the displacement jumped to 426 cubic inches. A mid-year update in May '63 became the Stage 2. And here's something that people get wrong all the time. There was never a Stage 1. Ever. The '62 413 and the early '63 426 were just called maximum performance wedges. No stage number. That whole Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3 thing you hear at car shows, only the Stage 2 and Stage 3 labels were real. I've seen people argue about this for 20 minutes, and the original Chrysler technical bulletins are pretty clear on it. But what made the Max Wedge so interesting is how fast it peaked and then disappeared. The '64 Stage 3 was the final and best version. Bigger Carter carbs, hotter cam, better flowing heads, the block notch to clear the valves. It could run the quarter in the mid-11s at over 120 miles per hour. On paper, Chrysler still listed it at 415 and 425 horsepower, same as the year before. If you ask me, that was completely deliberate. Why poke the sanctioning bodies when you're already winning everything? But here's the twist. While the Stage 3 was dominating every drag strip in sight, Tom Hoover and engine design manager Bill Wiertman were already building its replacement down the hall in Highland Park. Going all the way back to March of '63, they got an assignment straight from Chrysler's board. Build us an engine that wins the 1964 Daytona 500. Hoover's solution was dead simple. Take the same RB block the Max Wedge already used and put hemispherical combustion chamber heads on it. The 426 Race Hemi was born, engine code A864. February 1964. Daytona 500. Richard Petty in his number 43 Plymouth led 184 out of 200 laps. Hemi-powered cars finished first, second, and third. And just like that, the Max Wedge was done as Chrysler's top weapon. The guys who built it had built the thing that killed it, in barely 2 years. I don't know about you, but I think there's something kind of poetic about that. Today, finding a real Max Wedge is no joke. Dodge only built 214 of them in '62. Plymouth built 298. Most got raced into the ground and parted out decades ago. A numbers-matching Max Wedge car now? You're looking at 6 figures, easy. And even just a set of the cross-ram manifolds will cost you serious money at a swap meet, if one even shows up. But here's what I think is the coolest part of this whole story. If you pop the hood on pretty much any modern car today, you're going to see tuned length intake runners, variable length on a lot of them. Chrysler themselves brought the idea back on their 3 5-liter V6 in the '90s, with runners crossing over the engine, same basic concept as 1960. Those wild aluminum tubes draped over the valve covers on a Sonoramic Commando were about 30 years ahead of everybody else. And honestly, I think that's the part that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. I saw a comment from a guy who said he was a teenager the first time he popped the hood on a Chrysler 300-letter car with the long rams. He said the sight of those 2 carburetors hanging out past the fenders blew his mind. I completely believe that. It still does. But that does wrap up the story of Chrysler's cross-ram induction. From a discarded dyno piece on a $50 junkyard Plymouth to an intake system that won Super Stock and then got replaced by the engine it helped create. Let me know in the comments down below if you've ever seen one of these in person. Long ram or short cross ram. Or heck, if you were lucky enough to actually own one back in the day. I'd really be curious. If you had a 413, would you have gone long ram for that insane highway torque, or short cross ram for the strip? Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps me out. and I will see you all in the next one, enthusiasts.